The dust from the stagecoach settled on her traveling dress as Olivia Henderson stepped onto the wooden boardwalk of Seattle, Washington Territory, in the summer of 1878, already knowing this rough frontier town would test every ounce of her determination to survive. She carried one worn carpetbag and a leather satchel containing her mother's sewing kit. The only inheritance worth keeping after her father's debts had swallowed everything else back in Boston. The air smelled different here, sharp with salt from the Puget Sound and heavy with the scent of pine and sawdust from the lumber mills that dominated the waterfront. Seattle was growing fast, transforming from a sleepy settlement into something more substantial, and Olivia hoped she could transform herself just as completely. She had answered an advertisement for a seamstress position at Mrs. Carleton's dress shop, a modest establishment on 2nd Avenue. The woman who greeted her was stern-faced and practical, with silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. Mrs. Carleton looked Olivia up and down with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing, from the carefully mended tiers in her skirt to the quality of the stitching on her collar. "You did that work yourself?" Mrs. Carleton asked, pointing to the delicate embroidery on Olivia's cuffs. "Yes, madam. My mother taught me before she passed 3 years ago." Mrs. Carleton nodded slowly. "The position pays $15 a month, includes room and board in the apartment upstairs. The hours are long, the work is steady, and I do not tolerate laziness or loose morals. Can you accept those terms?" Olivia felt relief wash through her like cool water. "Yes, madam, thank you." The apartment was small but clean, with a single window overlooking the muddy street below. Olivia unpacked her few belongings and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to sit on the narrow bed and feel the weight of her loneliness. Then she stood, smoothed her skirts, and went downstairs to begin her new life. The work proved as demanding as promised. Olivia spent her days hunched over intricate needlework, letting out seams for the merchant wives who had grown plump on prosperity, taking in waists for the younger women who wanted to follow the latest fashions from San Francisco. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, and soon Mrs. Carleton began trusting her with the more delicate repairs and custom orders. Seattle itself was a rough town despite its aspirations toward civilization. Loggers came down from the camps with money burning holes in their pockets. Sailors from the ships crowding the harbor wandered the streets looking for entertainment. The mix of cultures fascinated Olivia as she watched from her window above the shop. She saw Chinese laborers heading to their homes south of town, native peoples trading at the markets, and men from every corner of the world drawn by the promise of timber, fish, and opportunity. 3 weeks after her arrival, the bell above the shop door chimed just before closing time. Olivia looked up from the wedding dress. She was hemming to see a man standing in the doorway, hat in his hands. He was tall and weathered, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in spring. His clothes told the story of hard use. Shirt torn at the shoulder, vest missing 2 buttons, trousers with a split seam at the knee. He looked uncomfortable in the feminine space of the dress shop, shifting his weight from one boot to the other. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "I know this is a dress shop, but Mrs. Carleton sometimes does mending for the men in town. Is she available?" "Mrs. Carleton has left for the day," Olivia replied, setting down her needle, "but I can help you. I handle most of the mending and alterations." The man seemed uncertain, but he stepped closer. In the better light, Olivia could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 27 or 28. Hard living had added years to his face, but there was something kind in his eyes. "I have a job interview at the Hamilton Ranch tomorrow," he explained. "They are looking for a foreman to manage their cattle operation, I need to look presentable, but as you can see, my clothes have seen better days." Olivia stood and came around the counter. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to his shirt. He hesitated, then shrugged out of his vest and turned so she could examine the tier. The fabric was rough cotton, sun-faded and worn thin in places. The rip was clean, easily mended. "I can fix this tonight," she said. "The vest will take longer and the trousers. Can you come back in 2 days?" Relief crossed his face. "I would be grateful, madam. What do I owe you?" $2 for everything." He pulled coins from his pocket and counted them carefully into her palm. His hands were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked with rope and leather and unforgiving animals. When his fingers brushed hers, Olivia felt an unexpected flutter in her chest that she firmly ignored. "I will return the day after tomorrow," he said, putting his vest back on over his torn shirt. He paused at the door, turning back. "My name is Robert Dawson, madam. I appreciate your help." "Olivia Henderson. You are welcome, Mr. Dawson." After he left, Olivia stood for a moment looking at the closed door. Then she shook her head at her own foolishness and carried his clothes upstairs. She worked by lamplight until her eyes ached, her needle moving in tiny, precise stitches. The tear in the shirt required a patch, so she cut fabric from the tail where it would be hidden by his vest. The vest buttons she replaced with better ones from Mrs. Carlton's supplies, making a note to deduct the cost from her pay. The trousers took the most time as the seam had to be reinforced to hold under strain. As she worked, Olivia found herself wondering about Robert Dawson. He spoke like an educated man, his words carefully chosen despite the roughness of his voice. His clothes were poor, but clean. A drifter, perhaps, looking for stability. The West was full of such men, running from pasts they would rather forget or simply seeking fresh starts in a place that did not ask too many questions. She finished near midnight and fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. The work was good. It would see him through his interview and perhaps help him build a better future. The next day passed slowly. Olivia helped 3 customers select fabric for new dresses, repaired a torn petticoat, and hemmed 2 shirts for a merchant's son. Mrs. Carlton commented on her distraction but said nothing more. When the day finally ended and Robert Dawson had not appeared, Olivia felt an odd disappointment that annoyed her. She barely knew the man. What did it matter if he came or not? But the following morning, just after the shop opened, the bell chimed and there he stood. He was transformed. His clothes fit properly now, neat and respectable. He had shaved and trimmed his hair, revealing a strong jawline and features that would be considered handsome if they were not so careworn. But it was his eyes that stopped Olivia's breath. They held a deep sadness that even his grateful smile could not hide. "Miss Henderson," he said, "you have worked miracles. I got the position." "Congratulations, Mr. Dawson. I am pleased the interview went well." "The interview went well because I looked like a man worth hiring instead of a saddle tramp." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. Then he pulled out a small cloth bundle. "I know you charged fair price for the work, but I wanted to show my gratitude. I shot a deer yesterday. This is some of the venison. I thought perhaps you might find it useful." Olivia was touched by the gesture. Fresh meat was always welcome. "That is very kind. Thank you." He shifted his weight again, that same uncomfortable movement she had noticed before. "Miss Henderson, I wonder if I might ask you something. It is forward of me and you should feel free to refuse." "What is it? Would you consider taking on regular mending work?" "The Hamilton Ranch has a bunkhouse with 8 men. Cowboys are hard on clothes. We would pay fair prices and it would be steady work. I would have to speak with Mrs. Carlton, but I do not see why that would be a problem." Robert's face relaxed into another smile. "Good. That is good." He started to leave, then turned back once more. "Miss Henderson, you offered to mend my clothes. They were torn and worn, barely fit to wear. You took something damaged and made it whole again." He hesitated, his creek water eyes searching her face. "I wonder if you might also consider mending a lonely heart." The question was so unexpected, so raw in its honesty, that Olivia could not immediately respond. She saw vulnerability in his expression, a desperate hope mixed with fear of rejection. This was not a practiced line from a man who courted easily. This was something real. "Mr. Dawson," she said softly, "that is quite a question to ask someone you have just met. I know. I apologize if I have offended you, but I have been alone for a long time, Miss Henderson. When I walked in here 3 days ago, I expected to find a simple seamstress. Instead, I found someone who took care with my clothes even though I was a stranger. Someone who worked late into the night so I could have my chance at a better life. That kind of care, that kind of heart, is rare in this world." Olivia felt her own heart beating faster. She should send him away. She knew nothing about this man except that he needed his clothes mended and he had kind eyes. But something in his words resonated with her own loneliness, the isolation she had felt since arriving in Seattle. "I do not even know you," she said. "Then let me remedy that. Have dinner with me on Sunday. The hotel dining room is respectable and proper. We can talk and you can decide if I am worth your time." She should say no. Every practical bone in her body told her to refuse, but Olivia heard herself say, "Yes, Sunday would be fine." His smile transformed his face, chasing away years of hardship. "Thank you, Miss Henderson. I will call for you at noon." After he left, Mrs. Carleton emerged from the back room where she had been pretending not to listen. "That man has had a hard road," she said, "but he has good eyes, honest eyes." "You eavesdropped," Olivia said, feeling her cheeks warm. "My shop, my right." "Be careful, Olivia, but do not be so careful that you miss out on living. This territory is not kind to women alone. A good man is worth considering, even if he comes with nothing but honest work and a lonely heart." Sunday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Olivia wore her best dress, a green cotton that brought out the hazel in her eyes. She had stayed up late the night before adding fresh lace to the collar and cuffs, wanting to look her finest. When Robert arrived, he wore the clothes she had mended and carried wildflowers picked from the meadows outside town. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you. The flowers are lovely." The walk to the hotel took them past the bustling waterfront. Seattle was alive with activity even on Sunday. Robert offered his arm and Olivia took it, feeling the solid strength beneath his sleeve. They talked of small things at first: the weather, the growth of the town, the ships in the harbor. The hotel dining room was indeed respectable, with white tablecloths and actual glass windows. Robert ordered chicken and potatoes for both of them, and coffee so strong it could stand a spoon upright. When the waitress left, he folded his hands on the table and looked directly at Olivia. "I should tell you about myself," he said. "You deserve to know who you are dining with, all right. I was born in Texas on a ranch outside Austin. My father raised cattle and horses. He was a good man, fair and hardworking. He taught me everything about ranching. I had a mother who sang in the church choir and 2 younger sisters who pestered me constantly." His expression grew distant. "That was before the war." Olivia waited, sensing there was more. "I was 17 when it started. Too young to really understand what it all meant, but old enough to be caught up in it. I served 4 years, Miss Henderson. 4 years of watching men die for reasons that seemed less clear with every battle. When I finally came home in 1865, I found my father dead from fever, my mother broken by grief, and my sisters married off to men who had stayed behind. The ranch was gone, sold for debts. I am so sorry. He shook his head. I spent years drifting after that. Working cattle drives, breaking horses, taking whatever jobs would pay. I saved what I could, hoping someday to have my own place again. But the money never seemed enough, and the loneliness just got heavier. I came to Washington Territory 6 months ago, thinking maybe I could start fresh where nobody knew me as the boy who went to war and came back a stranger. The waitress brought their food, and they ate in silence for a moment. Then, Olivia set down her fork and met his eyes. "You asked if I could mend your lonely heart, Mr. Dawson. I think that is not something I can do. A heart mends itself, given time and care and reason to heal. But perhaps I could keep you company while it mends." His hand reached across the table, stopping just short of touching hers. "That would be more than I have any right to ask." "Then tell me, what do you want from life? What does Robert Dawson dream about when he is alone at night?" The question seemed to surprise him. "I want a place of my own. Land where I can raise cattle and horses, build a house that will stand for generations. I want to wake up each morning knowing I am building something permanent, something that matters. And I want someone to share it with. Someone who understands that life out here is hard but can be good if you have the right person beside you. That is a fine dream. What about you, Miss Henderson? What brought you to Seattle?" Olivia told him about Boston, about her father's gambling debts and her mother's death, about the decision to leave everything familiar and travel 3,000 miles to start over. She spoke of her love for sewing, how the precision of needle and thread brought order to chaos. She admitted her loneliness, the fear that she might spend her life alone in a small apartment above a dress shop. "I want to matter to someone," she said quietly. "I want to build a life that means something more than just surviving day to day." Robert's hand moved the final inch and covered hers. His skin was warm and rough. "You matter, Olivia Henderson. You mattered the moment you stayed up late to fix a stranger's clothes so he could have his chance. That kind of caring heart is exactly what this territory needs." They talked through the afternoon until the dining room began filling with the dinner crowd. Robert walked her back to the dress shop, his hand still holding hers. At the door he stopped. "May I call on you again? I would like that." "Next Sunday?" "Yes." He lifted her hand and kissed it gently, an old-fashioned gesture that made her heart flutter. "Thank you for giving me hope, Olivia." Over the following weeks, Sunday became the day Olivia lived for. Robert would arrive each week with flowers or some small gift, a pretty stone from the creek, a bird's feather in brilliant blue, once a tiny carved wooden horse no bigger than her thumb. They would walk through Seattle, exploring the growing town together. He showed her the lumber mills where massive trees were transformed into boards destined for cities across the country. She took him to the market where native women sold beautiful baskets and beadwork. They talked endlessly. Robert spoke of his work at the Hamilton Ranch, of the cattle he was helping raise and the systems he was implementing. His pride in doing the work well was evident. Olivia shared stories of her customers, the little dramas and comedies that played out in the dress shop. She told him about Mrs. Carlton's sharp tongue that hid a generous heart, and how she was learning to run every aspect of the business. The other ranch hands began bringing their mending to Olivia, just as Robert had promised. She spent her evenings repairing shirts torn by barbed wire, replacing buttons, patching holes worn through by hard work. The extra money was welcome, but more than that, she felt connected to Robert's world through these articles of clothing. When she mended a tear in his shirt, she would imagine him wearing it, think about what had caused the damage, wonder if he had been safe. In August, Robert took her on a picnic to a meadow overlooking Puget Sound. The grass was high and golden, dotted with late summer wildflowers. They sat on a blanket Robert had borrowed from the ranch, eating cold chicken and fresh bread. Below them, the water stretched blue and vast, dotted with white sails. "I have been saving money," Robert said, lying back with his hands behind his head. "Mr. Hamilton is pleased with my work. He has given me 2 raises already. That is wonderful. There is land for sale north of here, 200 acres with water access and good grazing. The owner wants to sell and move to California." He rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow. "I have almost enough for the down payment. Another year, maybe 2, and I could make it mine." Olivia felt her heart sink even as she forced a smile. 2 years is not so long. It feels like forever when I think about spending it without you." She turned to look at him. "What do you mean?" "Olivia, these past months have been the happiest of my life. When I am working, I think about Sunday. When Sunday comes, the hours fly by too fast. When I am alone at night, I imagine what it would be like to have you beside me always." He sat up, taking both her hands in his. "I know it is too soon. I know I have nothing to offer yet but dreams and hard work. But I need you to know that my intentions are serious. I am courting you because I want you to be my wife." The words hung in the summer air between them. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. "You are crying," Robert said, alarmed. "I have upset you. I should not have spoken so soon." "No," Olivia said, wiping her eyes. "These are happy tears. Robert, I have been so afraid to hope. I did not know if you felt what I feel." "What do you feel?" "That Sunday is the only day that truly matters. That mending your clothes is the best part of my week because it means touching something that belongs to you. That I imagine building that house on your land and filling it with everything we need to make it a home." She squeezed his hands. "I feel like my heart is mending just as you said it might, because you give me reason to believe in tomorrow." Robert pulled her close and kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "Will you wait for me?" he asked. 2 years at most, until I can offer you a proper home." "I will wait," Olivia promised. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. In September, Mrs. Carleton called Olivia into the back room after closing. The older woman looked unusually serious. "My sister in Portland has fallen ill," she said without preamble. "She is widowed with no children, and I am her only family. I need to go to her." "Of course," Olivia said. "How long will you be gone, permanently?" "I am selling the shop." Olivia felt the floor drop out from under her. "Selling? I am sorry, dear. I know this is sudden, but my sister needs me, and I am tired of running this business alone. There is a buyer interested, a woman from San Francisco. She will keep you on if you wish, or I can provide excellent references if you want to seek employment elsewhere." That night, Olivia barely slept. The new owner might be terrible to work for, or she might decide to bring her own seamstress from California. Even with references, finding another position in Seattle was not guaranteed. The security she had built over the past months was crumbling. On Sunday, she told Robert everything. They were walking along the waterfront watching ships load cargo. He listened without interrupting, his face growing more troubled. "What will you do?" he asked when she finished. "I do not know yet. Meet the new owner, I suppose, and hope for the best." Robert stopped walking and turned to face her. "Marry me." Olivia's heart leaped and sank simultaneously. "Robert, we agreed to wait. You are not ready." "We agreed to wait until I could offer you a proper home, but circumstances have changed. We can marry now and live simply until I have the land. The bunkhouse is no place for a wife, but we could rent a room in town. You could continue your mending work independently. It would be hard, but we would be together." "Robert, I cannot let you sacrifice your dream. The land is too important." "You are more important. He gripped her shoulders gently. Olivia, I have lived 10 years alone, focused on nothing but saving money and planning for a future that felt more like a fantasy with each passing year. Then I met you, and suddenly the future became real. It became something worth building because I could imagine sharing it with you. The land will still be there in a year or 2 years or 5 years. But if I lose you because I was too stubborn to adjust my plans, I will regret it for the rest of my life. Are you certain? I have never been more certain of anything. Olivia thought of all the practical reasons to refuse. They had known each other less than 3 months. They had never spent more than a few hours together at a time. Marriage was a serious commitment, not something to rush into. But her heart knew what her head was still debating. Robert Dawson was a good man who loved her and would work himself to exhaustion to build them a life. That was more than most women could hope for, especially in a rough territory like Washington. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her right there on the boardwalk, not caring who saw. An old sailor walking past let out a whoop of encouragement. Olivia laughed against Robert's lips, feeling joy bubble up inside her like champagne. They were married 2 weeks later by a circuit preacher who rode through Seattle monthly. The wedding was simple, held in the small church on 3rd Avenue with Mrs. Carleton and 3 of the ranch hands as witnesses. Olivia wore the best dress from the shop, altered to fit her perfectly. Robert wore the clothes she had first mended for him, now showing signs of wear again but still respectable. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Robert kissed her with such tenderness that Olivia felt tears slip down her cheeks. Mrs. Carleton hosted a small reception in the shop, serving cake and coffee. "You take care of her," she told Robert sternly. "She is a treasure, and do not you forget it." "I will not, madam," Robert promised. They moved into a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. The room was small, barely large enough for a bed, a chest of drawers, and a single chair. But it had a window that let in good light, and Mrs. Patterson allowed Olivia to use the sitting room for her sewing work during the day. Those first weeks of marriage tested them both. Robert left before dawn to ride out to the ranch and rarely returned before full dark. Olivia took on as much mending work as she could find, building a clientele beyond just the ranch hands. They were often exhausted, falling into bed too tired for more than a gentle kiss goodnight. But there were beautiful moments, too. Robert would sometimes bring her wildflowers picked on his ride back to town. Olivia would save part of her dinner to share with him when he arrived home hungry. On Sundays, their one full day together, they would sleep late tangled in each other's arms, then spend the afternoon exploring their new life together. The physical intimacy of marriage surprised Olivia with its intensity. She had been raised to believe it was a duty wives endured. Instead, she found joy in Robert's touch, in the way his calloused hands could be so gentle, in the passion that flared between them. He was patient and caring, always attentive to her comfort. In the small privacy of their room, they learned each other's bodies and hearts with equal tenderness. By October, they had fallen into a rhythm. Olivia's mending business was thriving. She had customers throughout Seattle, from merchants to mill workers. Her reputation for quality work spread, and she often had to turn away jobs because she lacked time. Robert continued to excel at the ranch. Mr. Hamilton had put him in charge of purchasing new breeding stock, trusting his eye for quality cattle. One evening, Robert came home with unusual energy despite his long day. He burst into their room where Olivia sat mending a shirt by lamplight. "The land is still for sale," he announced. Olivia set down her sewing. "The 200 acres. Yes, I spoke to the owner today. He is desperate to leave, willing to take less than his original asking price. With what I have saved and what we have earned together these past weeks, we have enough for a down payment. Truly, truly. We would still owe a substantial amount, and we would need to borrow to build even a modest house. But the land would be ours, Olivia. We could start building our future now instead of waiting. Olivia stood and went to him. Show me the papers. They spent that evening going over every detail. The land was 20 miles north of Seattle, near a settlement that was barely a crossroads. There was a creek running through it and good timber. The soil was fertile. It would be isolated, far from the comparative civilization of Seattle, but it would be theirs. If we do this, Olivia said slowly, I will lose most of my customers. I cannot travel 20 miles to deliver mending work. I know it would be a sacrifice. But I could build new customers eventually. The ranchers and farmers in that area would need the same services. It would take time. We would be living very simply at first. I would have to build the house myself, working evenings and Sundays. It might be a year before it is really comfortable. Olivia thought of Mrs. Carleton's words. Do not be so careful that you miss out on living. This was living. This was building something real and permanent. Let us do it, she said. The next weeks were a blur of activity. Robert negotiated with the landowner and secured the deed. He borrowed money from the bank for building materials, putting up his savings as collateral. They gave notice to Mrs. Patterson and began selling or giving away anything they could not carry on a wagon. Olivia worked frantically to complete all her pending mending jobs, wanting to leave her Seattle customers satisfied even if she could no longer serve them. On a cold November morning, they loaded their few possessions onto a borrowed wagon and left Seattle behind. The road north was rough, more of a trail than a proper road in places. Rain had turned sections to mud that grabbed at the wagon wheels. But Robert's spirits were high, and his enthusiasm infected Olivia. There, he said, pointing ahead. That bend in the creek, that is where our land begins. Olivia saw thick forest, a silver ribbon of water and hills rolling into the distance. It was beautiful and wild and completely undeveloped. Her heart sank a little, thinking of the comfortable room they had left behind. But then she looked at Robert's face, saw the joy and pride there, and felt her doubts fade. They spent the first night in the wagon, wrapped in blankets and listening to the rain drum on the canvas cover. Robert held her close, his body heat keeping her warm. Are you sorry? He asked quietly. No, are you? Not even a little. This is where we build everything, Olivia. This is where our life really begins. The next morning dawned clear and cold. They walked their land together, Robert pointing out features and discussing plans. He would build the house on a small rise that overlooked the creek. The barn would go closer to the water. They would fence the meadow for grazing and clear enough timber to sell for extra money. It will take time, he warned her again. I am one man with limited resources. Then I will help you, Olivia said. I can carry boards and hold things steady. I might not be strong like you, but I am not helpless. He laughed and kissed her. I never thought you were helpless, wife, just practical enough to know when something will be hard. They began work that very day. Robert had brought basic tools and enough lumber for a temporary shelter. In 3 days, they had built a rough cabin, barely more than 4 walls and a roof, with a fireplace made of creek stones. It was 12 feet square with a dirt floor and gaps between the boards that let in wind and rain. But it was shelter, and it was theirs. Olivia made curtains from an old blanket to cover the single small window. She arranged their few possessions to make the space as homelike as possible. Their bed was a wooden frame with ropes strung across it, topped with a straw mattress. They had 1 table, 2 chairs, and a trunk that held everything they owned. It was primitive, but Olivia felt a fierce pride in it. Winter arrived with teeth. Snow fell in heavy blankets, covering everything. Robert worked despite the cold, cutting timber and dragging logs to the building site. He was constructing the real house now, taking care with every joint and board. Olivia helped when she could, though the cold often drove her back to the cabin where she kept the fire going and worked on mending for the few neighbors they had met. The isolation was the hardest part. Days would pass when they saw no one but each other. The nearest settlement, such as it was, consisted of a general store and a blacksmith. Other homesteaders were scattered across the landscape, most dealing with their own struggles to establish farms and ranches. Olivia missed Mrs. Carlton, missed the bustle of Seattle, missed having other women to talk to, but she had Robert. In the evenings, after exhausting days of work, they would sit by the fire and talk. He told her more about his childhood, about his sisters and the ranch he had loved. She shared memories of her mother, teaching her to sew with patient hands. They made plans for the future, how many cattle they would raise, what crops to plant, where to put the garden. And at night, in their narrow bed beneath piles of blankets, they found warmth and comfort in each other. Robert's lovemaking was tender and passionate, a reminder that they were building this life together. Olivia discovered depths of feeling she had not known she possessed. In those intimate moments, the hardship seemed worthwhile. By February, the frame of the new house stood complete. It was modest by any standard, but it looked like a palace to Olivia. 2 rooms downstairs, 2 rooms upstairs with real windows and a solid roof. Robert had even included a covered porch across the front. For sitting in the summer evenings, he explained. To watch the sunset and rest after a day's work. March brought the first signs of spring. The snow melted, the creek ran high and fast, and green began appearing on the brown landscape. Robert finished the exterior walls and began work on the interior. Olivia painted the walls with whitewash, making the rooms bright and clean. She sewed curtains from fabric she had brought from Seattle, cheerful calico that made the windows look welcoming. One afternoon, as she hung the last curtain in what would be their bedroom, Olivia felt a wave of dizziness. She sat down quickly on the floor, her head spinning. When the feeling passed, she stood cautiously and returned to work. But over the following days the dizziness returned, accompanied by nausea that struck without warning. She said nothing to Robert at first, not wanting to worry him when he was working so hard. But when she began vomiting in the mornings, unable to keep down even water, he noticed. "You are ill," he said, his face creased with concern. "We need to get you to a doctor." "The nearest doctor is in Seattle," Olivia reminded him. "That is a day's travel, and we cannot afford to lose the time or the money." "I do not care about time or money. Your health matters more." But even as he said it, Olivia realized what was happening. She counted back days in her mind, calculated timing, and felt a surge of certainty. "Robert, I do not think I am ill. I think I am pregnant." He stared at her, his expression cycling through surprise, disbelief, and finally joy. "Pregnant, are you certain?" "Not completely, but the signs are all there. I am late, I am sick in the mornings, and everything smells wrong." He pulled her into his arms, holding her gently as if she might break. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, sudden fear gripping her. A baby would make everything harder. They could barely support themselves. "Happy, Olivia, I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. This is everything I dreamed of, a home, a wife I love, and now a child." He pulled back to look at her face. "Are you happy?" "Yes," she said and meant it. "Yes, I am happy. And terrified." They laughed together, holding each other in the half-finished house that would be their home. Robert became protective to the point of obsession. He would not let Olivia lift anything heavy or work too long. She protested that she was pregnant, not dying, but he remained firm. They made a trip to Seattle when she was 3 months along, seeing a doctor who confirmed the pregnancy and pronounced her healthy. While in town, Robert spent precious money on supplies for the baby: cloth for diapers, knitting yarn, a book about infant care. Back at the homestead, they worked with renewed purpose. The house had to be finished before winter returned, before the baby came. Robert hired 2 men from the settlement to help with the heavy work, paying them with promises of lumber from their land. The house came together rapidly. By June, they had floors, stairs, and doors. By July, it was complete enough to move in. Olivia walked through the rooms with tears in her eyes. It was not grand, but it was beautiful to her. The kitchen had a real stove, purchased used from a family leaving the territory. The sitting room had a fireplace big enough to heat the entire downstairs. The bedroom upstairs was cozy, with the window overlooking the creek. The second upstairs room, smaller and tucked under the eaves, would be the nursery. She spent August preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny gowns from soft cotton, knitted booties and caps, made blankets. Robert built a cradle from cedar, carving their initials on the headboard. They were as ready as they could be. The baby came in early October, on a morning when the aspens had turned gold and the air smelled of autumn. A neighbor woman, Mrs. Foster, came to help with the birth. She was a practical, no-nonsense woman who had delivered 4 of her own children and helped with countless others. Labor was long and hard. Olivia had known it would be painful, but nothing prepared her for the reality. Robert stayed with her despite Mrs. Foster's suggestion that he leave, holding Olivia's hand and wiping her forehead with cool cloths. When the pain became unbearable, his presence was the only thing that kept her grounded. Finally, after 14 hours, a baby's cry filled the house. "A boy," Mrs. Foster announced, placing the squirming infant on Olivia's chest. "Healthy lungs on this one." Olivia looked down at her son, overwhelmed with love so fierce it was almost painful. He was red and wrinkled, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn the same creek water green as his father's. Robert touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger, his expression full of wonder. "Hello, son," he whispered. "Welcome home." They named him Thomas, after Robert's father. Little Thomas proved to be a good baby, crying only when hungry or tired. Olivia discovered that motherhood came naturally to her, though the exhaustion was overwhelming. Robert helped when he could, walking the baby at night when Thomas was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, but having a baby changed everything. Robert could no longer devote all his time to building the ranch. He had to take on outside work to earn money, hiring himself out to other ranchers for spring branding and fall roundup. Olivia was alone much of the time, caring for Thomas and managing the house. The mending work she had hoped to resume remained impossible. She had no time and no customers this far from any town. Money became a constant worry. They had taken on debt to build the house, borrowed against future earnings that were not materializing as quickly as hoped. The first payment on the land was coming due, and they were not sure they could make it. One November evening, after Thomas had been put to bed, they sat at the kitchen table going over their accounts. The numbers did not look good. "We could sell some timber rights," Robert suggested. "There is a logging company working about 15 miles south. They would pay for access to our trees." "That would bring in quick money," Olivia agreed. "But we need those trees for future income. Once they are cut, they are gone." "I know, but I do not see another option. I can pick up more work, but that means being away from home even more, and you cannot take on work while caring for Thomas." Olivia stared at the ledger, frustration welling up. They had worked so hard, sacrificed so much. It was not fair that they might lose everything anyway. "There has to be another way," she said. "If you can think of one, I am listening." An idea began forming in Olivia's mind. "What if we took in boarders?" Robert looked skeptical. "Who would board with us? We are too far from anywhere." "Exactly. We are halfway between Seattle and the settlements to the north. Travelers need places to stop. Ranch hands looking for work need places to stay while they search. We have the room, and I could cook for them. It would not be much money per person, but if we had a steady stream, it could help." "That would be even more work for you, I know. But it would be work I could do here with Thomas nearby, and if we made it known we are offering clean beds and good food, people would come." Robert thought about it, turning the idea over. "It might work. It would be hard, especially on you." "Everything is hard right now. At least this way we would be trying something different." They decided to try it. Robert put up a sign at the crossroads near the general store advertising room and board. Within a week, their first guest arrived, a cowhand traveling north to work a ranch near the Canadian border. He stayed 3 nights, paid his fee without complaint, and told them the food was the best he had eaten in months. Word spread. More travelers came, sometimes several at once. Olivia found herself cooking large meals and changing sheets on what felt like constant rotation. It was exhausting work on top of caring for Thomas, but the money was real. By January, they had enough to make their land payment with a little left over. The work was relentless. Olivia would rise before dawn to start breakfast, then spend the day cleaning, cooking, and managing the household, while also caring for a baby who was learning to crawl and getting into everything. Robert helped when he was home, but he still had to work the ranch, tend their small herd of cattle, and maintain the property. They rarely had time alone together anymore. When they fell into bed at night, they were too exhausted for conversation, let alone intimacy. Olivia missed the closeness they had shared, missed the long talks and gentle lovemaking. But there were never enough hours in the day. One February evening, after their last boarder had left and Thomas was finally asleep, Olivia sat at the kitchen table and cried. She was so tired. Her back ached constantly from the physical work. Her hands were rough and reddened from washing endless dishes and laundry. She felt like she was drowning, barely keeping her head above water. Robert found her there. Without a word, he pulled a chair close and took her in his arms. She sobbed against his shoulder, letting out weeks of accumulated frustration and exhaustion. "I am sorry," she gasped. "I should not complain. We are making it work. We are surviving." "Surviving is not the same as living," Robert said quietly. "Olivia, this is not what I wanted for us. I wanted to give you a good life, not work you to death. It is not your fault. This is what homesteading is. Maybe, but that does not make it right or fair." He stroked her hair gently. "We need to find a better balance. You cannot continue like this. What choice do we have?" "I do not know yet, but we will figure something out. We always do." March brought a surprise. Mrs. Foster arrived with her 15-year-old daughter, Emma. "I hear you are running a boarding house," she said, "and I thought you could use some help." Emma is looking for work, and she is a good girl. Strong, learns fast, not afraid of hard work. Olivia looked at Emma, who stood shyly behind her mother. The girl was sturdy and plain-faced, with capable hands and a direct gaze. "I can pay only a little," Olivia warned. "Food and a place to sleep, plus $2 a month," Mrs. Foster said. "That is fair." It was more than fair. It was an answered prayer. Emma moved into the small room off the kitchen that had originally been intended as a pantry. She proved to be everything her mother promised: hardworking, quick to learn, and good with Thomas. With Emma helping, Olivia found she could breathe again. Spring arrived with a rush of green. The creek flooded its banks, the meadows burst into flower, and the world seemed renewed. Robert hired 2 cowboys for the season, paying them partly in room and board. With their help, he was able to focus more on building up the herd. On a warm May evening, after Thomas was in bed and Emma had retired to her room, Robert took Olivia's hand and led her outside. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. They sat on the porch swing Robert had built and hung that afternoon. "This was what I imagined," he said softly, sitting together at the end of the day watching the sunset. Olivia leaned against his shoulder. "It is beautiful." "You are beautiful, even more than the day I met you somehow," she laughed. "I am a mess. My hands are rough, I have lines around my eyes, and I wear the same 3 dresses over and over." "You are beautiful," he repeated firmly. "You are the woman who took a chance on a lonely cowboy, who moved to the middle of nowhere and built a home with her own hands, who works herself to exhaustion to help me chase my dreams. How could you be anything but beautiful?" Olivia felt tears threaten again, but this time they were happy tears. "I love you, Robert Dawson." "I love you too, Olivia Dawson. More than I thought I could love anyone." He kissed her then, a real kiss full of passion and promise. Later, in their bedroom with the window open to the spring breeze, they made love with the same intensity as their early days of marriage. Olivia had not realized how much she had missed this connection until she felt it again. That summer was the best they had known since arriving on the homestead. The cattle were thriving, the boarding house was bringing in steady money, and they had helped to make the work manageable. Thomas was walking now, toddling around the house and yard, getting into everything with the fearless curiosity of a young child. In August, Robert came home with exciting news. "I sold 10 head of cattle to a buyer in Seattle. Good price, better than I expected, and he wants more next year." "That is wonderful. It means we can pay off some of our debt. Not all of it, but enough to breathe easier." He picked up Thomas and tossed him in the air, making the boy shriek with laughter. "Hear that, son? Your father is becoming a real rancher." By their 2nd anniversary in September, they had saved enough to buy breeding stock, 2 more bulls and 6 heifers. Robert's herd was growing. The future he had dreamed of was becoming reality, but autumn brought trouble. One of their boarders, a surly man named Pike who made Olivia uncomfortable with his stares, got drunk one evening and became violent. He grabbed Emma when she was serving dinner, making crude suggestions. Robert threw him out bodily, but the incident shook everyone. "We need to be more careful about who we accept," Robert said grimly. "I will not have you or Emma threatened in your own home." They became more selective after that, turning away men who gave them bad feelings or showed signs of trouble. It meant less income, but Olivia felt safer. Winter came again, the second they would spend in the completed house. This time it felt easier, familiar. They had laid in good supplies and had the systems down for managing the boarders and the livestock. Thomas, now 15 months old, was a bright, active child who filled the house with laughter. Christmas morning, Robert surprised Olivia with a gift. "I know money is tight," he said, handing her a wrapped package, "but I wanted you to have this." Inside was fabric, beautiful emerald green silk enough for a dress. Olivia stared at it, overwhelmed. "Robert, this must have cost a fortune. You have not had a new dress in over 2 years. You deserve something pretty, something just for you." She hugged him tightly. "Thank you. I will make the most beautiful dress you have ever seen." She worked on the dress during January, taking her time with each stitch. It had been so long since she had sewn something for pleasure rather than necessity. Her skilled hands remembered every technique her mother had taught her, and the dress came together like a poem. When she finally tried it on, looking at herself in their bedroom mirror, she barely recognized the elegant woman staring back. "Stunning," Robert said from the doorway. You should wear it to the spring dance." "What spring dance?" "The one the settlement is organizing. Second Saturday in April at the Grange Hall. There will be music and food and everyone in the area. I thought we could go. Maybe ask Mrs. Foster to watch Thomas for the evening." Olivia had not been anywhere social since leaving Seattle. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. "I do not know. I am not sure I remember how to socialize." "Then we will learn together." "Come on, Olivia. When is the last time we had fun? Real fun, not just stolen moments between work." He was right. They had been so focused on survival that they had forgotten to actually live. "All right, let us go to the dance." The months until April seemed to crawl by, but finally the evening arrived. Mrs. Foster came to watch Thomas, who was now walking and talking in short sentences. Olivia wore her green silk dress, and Robert wore his best clothes. They climbed into the wagon and headed for the settlement. The Grange Hall was packed with people, more than Olivia had realized lived in the area. There were ranchers and farmers, loggers and their wives, children running wild outside. A three-piece band played fiddle music that made feet want to dance. Long tables held food brought by every family: roasted meats, fresh bread, pies, and cakes. Robert led Olivia onto the dance floor. She was rusty at first, uncertain of the steps, but he guided her patiently. Soon they were spinning and laughing, caught up in the music and the joy of being together away from work and responsibility. Between dances, they socialized. Olivia met other wives who understood the challenges of homesteading. They swapped recipes and advice, shared stories about their children, and laughed about the peculiarities of their husbands. Robert talked with other ranchers about cattle prices and breeding stock, making connections that could lead to future business. On the ride home, Olivia leaned against Robert's shoulder under the stars. "Thank you for making me go. I had forgotten how good it feels to be part of a community. We have been so isolated. Maybe that was a mistake. Maybe we need people more than we thought. Maybe, but I would not trade our home for anything. Even with all the hardship, I love what we have built." He kissed the top of her head. "So do I." That spring brought another surprise. In May, Olivia realized her monthly courses were late again. The familiar nausea confirmed her suspicions. She was pregnant with their second child. Thomas was not yet 2. Another baby so soon would make everything harder. But when she told Robert, his joy was unrestrained. Another child. Thomas will have a brother or sister to grow up with. This is wonderful. His happiness was contagious. Olivia found herself excited despite her practical concerns. They would manage somehow. They always did. The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Emma took on even more of the household work, giving Olivia time to rest when she needed it. The boarding house continued to thrive, bringing in enough money that Robert could hire help with the ranch work. In December, on a cold evening with snow falling outside, Olivia gave birth to their second son. The labor was shorter this time, only 8 hours, and Mrs. Foster's experienced hands guided the baby into the world. "Another boy," she announced, "and he looks just like his brother." They named him James, after Olivia's father despite his failings, because she wanted to remember the good parts of her childhood. Jamie, as they called him, was a different baby than Thomas had been, quieter, more content to observe the world rather than charge into it. Thomas was fascinated by his new brother, wanting to help with everything. The years began to blend together, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. Thomas started learning his letters, sitting at the kitchen table with Olivia as she taught him to read. Jamie toddled after his older brother, copying everything he did. The ranch continued to grow, the herd expanding, Robert's reputation for quality cattle spreading throughout the territory. Olivia's boarding house became well known as a clean, safe place with excellent food. She had a steady stream of customers, sometimes having to turn people away because all the rooms were full. Emma had become like family, an older daughter who helped manage everything. In 1883, when Thomas was 5 and Jamie 3, Washington Territory began agitating for statehood. The movement brought renewed energy and optimism to the settlers. More people arrived, new towns sprung up, the railroad pushed farther into the territory. Robert and Olivia's homestead, once isolated, now found itself on the edge of development. "We could sell," Robert said one evening, studying a map of the area. "With the railroad coming through, land values are rising. We could sell for enough to buy a bigger spread farther out." "Do you want to sell?" Olivia asked. He looked around their comfortable kitchen, then shook his head. "No. This is our home. We built it with our own hands. I do not want to start over somewhere else." "Neither do I. This is where we belong." That summer, Robert added onto the house, building 2 more bedrooms and enlarging the kitchen. The boarding house had outgrown the original space. With the new rooms, they could accommodate 8 guests at a time. It meant more work, but Emma had trained 2 younger girls from the settlement to help, creating a small staff. Olivia sometimes thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Seattle 7 years earlier. That woman had been alone and afraid, with nothing but a sewing kit and desperate hope. Now she was confident, capable, surrounded by family and community. She had helped build something permanent and good. In the autumn of 1884, Robert came home with news that made his eyes shine with pride. "I have been invited to join the Cattlemen's Association. They want me to sit on the board, help make decisions about breeding standards and sales territories." "Robert, that is wonderful. They must really respect your work. It means our ranch is being recognized as one of the best in the territory. Everything we have worked for, Olivia. It is actually happening." She hugged him tightly, feeling his heart pound with excitement. They had come so far from that first desperate winter in the tiny cabin. That Christmas was the best they had ever known. The house was decorated with evergreen boughs and strings of popcorn the boys had helped make. The table was laden with food: roasted goose, potatoes, fresh bread, 3 kinds of pie. Emma and her young man, a cowboy from a neighboring ranch, joined them. Mrs. Foster came with her husband and younger children. The house rang with laughter and conversation. After everyone had left and the boys were in bed, Robert and Olivia sat together on the porch swing despite the cold. He had his arm around her shoulders, keeping her warm. "You remember the day we met?" he asked. "Of course. You came into the dress shop looking uncomfortable and shy, with your clothes torn and worn. I asked if you could mend them, and then I asked if you could mend my lonely heart too. I remember. I thought it was the boldest thing anyone had ever said to me." He turned to look at her, his creek water eyes reflecting the lamplight from inside the house. "Did you mend my heart, I mean?" Olivia thought about the question seriously. "I do not think I mended it. I think we healed together. You were lonely and so was I. We found each other when we both needed someone most, and we built a life that gave us reason to be whole again." "That is a better answer than I deserved." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Olivia Dawson, more with every passing year. I love you too." In 1885, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, she was 30 years old and the pregnancy was harder on her body. She tired easily and suffered from backaches. Robert insisted she cut back on work, hiring additional help so she could rest. "Your health is more important than money," he said firmly. "We have enough to get by. You need to take care of yourself." The baby came in late summer, during a heat wave that made Olivia miserable. After a long labor, Mrs. Foster placed a squalling infant in her arms. "A girl this time," the older woman said with a smile. "Figured you boys needed a sister to keep them in line." They named her Rose, for the wild roses that grew along the creek. She was tiny and perfect, with wispy blonde hair and eyes that would eventually turn hazel like her mother's. Thomas and Jamie were enthralled with their baby sister, fighting over who got to hold her. As Rose grew, it became clear she had her mother's temperament. Calm, observant, with a stubborn determination hidden beneath a sweet exterior. She also had Olivia's hands, long-fingered and dexterous. By the time she was 3, she was already learning to sew, sitting beside her mother and practicing simple stitches. The boarding house continued to thrive through the late 1880s. Washington achieved statehood in 1889, bringing celebrations throughout the territory, now a state. Robert's cattle operation had grown to over 200 head. He employed 3 permanent ranch hands plus seasonal help. The Dawson Ranch was known throughout the state as a source of quality breeding stock, but success brought new challenges. Robert was often away at cattlemen's meetings or sales. The boys, now teenagers, had their own interests and activities. Rose demanded attention and energy. Olivia sometimes felt like she was managing a small hotel rather than a home. In 1890, Emma announced she was getting married and moving to her own homestead with her cowboy husband. Olivia was happy for her, but sad to lose the young woman who had become like a daughter. Finding good help proved difficult. The girls she hired were not as reliable or skilled as Emma had been. One evening, after a particularly trying day, Olivia sat alone in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. She was 40 years old, exhausted, and wondering if the boarding house had outlived its usefulness. They no longer needed the money desperately. Maybe it was time to reclaim their home as just a home. Robert found her there, lost in thought. "You are worrying again, always. It is my nature." He sat beside her. "Talk to me." "I am thinking maybe we should close the boarding house. We do not need it anymore, and I am tired, Robert. I want my house back. I want to have dinner with just my family, not strangers. I want to sit on the porch without wondering if a boarder needs something. Then let us close it. Just like that, just like that. You are right, we do not need it anymore. And you have earned the right to have your home to yourself." They closed the boarding house in the spring of 1891. Olivia felt 20 pounds lighter the day they hung a sign saying they were no longer accepting guests. She spent weeks cleaning and reorganizing, reclaiming space that had been devoted to strangers. The house began to feel like a true home again. With more time, Olivia returned to her first love, sewing. She began taking on custom dress orders for the women in the growing settlement, now prosperous enough to afford such luxuries. Her work was exquisite, each stitch perfect, each garment a work of art. Women traveled from miles away to be fitted for an Olivia Dawson original. Thomas, now 16, was showing interest in ranching. He followed his father everywhere, learning the business from the ground up. Jamie, 14, was more interested in books and learning. He talked about becoming a teacher or maybe a lawyer. Rose, at 10, was a perfect blend of both parents, practical like her mother, dreamy like her father had been in his youth. In 1895, Robert surprised Olivia with a trip to Seattle for their 17th wedding anniversary. They left the children with Mrs. Foster, now an old friend, and spent 3 days in the city. Seattle had grown enormously, transformed from the rough frontier town Olivia remembered into a real city with electric lights, paved streets, and grand buildings. They stayed at the finest hotel and ate in the best restaurants. Robert bought her a new dress, this one ready-made but still beautiful. They walked through the places they had courted, The waterfront, the markets, the church where they had married. Everything had changed, but the memories remained vivid. On their last evening, they stood at the waterfront watching the sunset over Puget Sound. "I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you had said no," Robert said. "If you had refused to have dinner with me that first time." "I would have lived a smaller life," Olivia replied. "Safe, perhaps, but small. You gave me something bigger than safety. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me the same thing. More than that, you gave me hope when I had given up on ever being happy." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two middle-aged people still deeply in love. The turn of the century brought changes. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread and built a house on Dawson land. He would eventually take over the ranch. Everyone understood. Jamie went to college in Seattle, studying law just as he had planned. Rose, now 15, was courting a young man from the settlement, much to Robert's concern. "She is too young," he grumbled one evening. "She is the same age I was when we met," Olivia reminded him. "That is different." How, he had no good answer, and they both knew it. Rose was sensible and mature for her age. If she wanted to marry young, they would not stand in her way. In 1903, Thomas and his wife gave Robert and Olivia their first grandchild, a boy they named Robert after his grandfather. Holding the baby, Robert's eyes filled with tears. "I never imagined this," he said softly. "When I walked into that dress shop 25 years ago, I was alone and nearly hopeless. Now look at all this." Olivia leaned against his shoulder, watching their son hold his son. "You asked if I could mend your lonely heart. I think we can safely say it has healed. More than healed. It has grown so large I sometimes think it cannot possibly hold all the love I feel." Rose married in 1904 to the young man she had been courting. The wedding was held at the ranch, with guests from throughout the state. Olivia made her daughter's dress, pouring all her skill and love into every stitch. Rose was a beautiful bride, radiant with happiness. Jamie came home from Seattle for the wedding with a young woman he introduced as his fiancée. She was a teacher, smart and kind, and Olivia liked her immediately. They would marry the following year, Jamie assured his parents. After the wedding, after the guests had left and the house was quiet again, Robert and Olivia walked down to the creek. It was the same creek they had crossed when they first arrived, but a bridge now spanned it, solid and permanent. They stood on the bridge watching the water flow past. "We did it," Robert said. "Everything I dreamed about that first day we met, the land, the house, the family, we built it all." "Together," Olivia corrected. "We built it together." "Yes, I could never have done it without you." She took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses and scars, the strength that remained despite the gray in his hair. "I think about that young woman who came to Seattle with nothing but a sewing kit and desperation. I wish I could tell her it would all work out. That taking a chance on a lonely cowboy would lead to this. Would she have believed you? Probably not. But she would have hoped." They stood together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch land stretched around them, green and prosperous. Smoke rose from Thomas's house on the far hill. Somewhere in Seattle, Jamie was building his future. Rose and her husband were starting their own homestead just 5 miles away. "No regrets?" Robert asked. Olivia thought about the question seriously. There had been hard times, moments when she had wondered if they would make it. Times when she had been so tired she could barely stand. Times when fear had threatened to overwhelm hope. But looking back over 25 years, seeing everything they had created together, she could answer honestly. No regrets, not a single one. In 1908, Robert suffered a heart attack while working cattle. It was mild, the doctor said, but a warning. He needed to slow down, take things easier. At 58, Robert was forced to admit he was no longer a young man. Thomas took over most of the ranch management, with his father advising but no longer doing the physical work. Robert struggled with the forced idleness at first. He was a man who had worked his entire life. Sitting still felt wrong. But Olivia kept him busy with projects around the house, always finding things that needed his attention but were not too strenuous. They spent more time together than they had in years. Long mornings sitting on the porch drinking coffee and watching the ranch wake up. Afternoons reading to each other. Evenings talking about nothing and everything. It was peaceful in a way their early years had never been. "I am glad it happened," Robert said one day, surprising Olivia. "The heart attack. Yes, it forced me to stop racing ahead all the time. To appreciate what we have instead of always pushing for more. We have a great deal to appreciate. We do. 30 years ago I had nothing. Now I have everything that matters." In 1910, at 55 years old, Olivia became a grandmother for the third time. Rose had a daughter, and Jamie's wife gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The house filled with visiting grandchildren, their laughter and chaos bringing new life to rooms that had grown quiet. Olivia taught her granddaughter to sew, just as her mother had taught her. The little girl had the same careful hands, the same patience for detail. Robert made toys for the boys, carved from wood with the skill of long practice. They were truly grandparents now, another stage of life to embrace. On their 32nd anniversary in September 1912, Robert and Olivia renewed their vows in a small ceremony at the ranch. All three children were there with their families. Friends and neighbors from throughout the area attended. It was not necessary, but Robert had insisted he wanted to publicly declare his love again. 32 years ago, I asked Olivia Henderson if she could mend my lonely heart, he said during the ceremony, his voice strong despite his age. She told me a heart mends itself, given time and care and reason to heal. She was wiser than I knew. My heart did heal, but only because she gave me reason every single day. She gave me love and partnership and a life worth living. So today, I want to say before all of you that I would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. Olivia Dawson, you are the best decision I ever made. Olivia could barely speak through her tears. And you are mine. You gave me a home and a family and a life bigger than I ever imagined. I love you more today than I did when we started, if such a thing is possible. They kissed while their children and grandchildren applauded. Looking out at the gathering, Olivia saw their legacy. Strong children, healthy grandchildren, a prosperous ranch built from nothing, a community they had helped create. Everything good in her life had started with a simple act of kindness, mending a stranger's torn clothes. In the spring of 1915, Robert caught pneumonia. At 65, his heart weakened from the earlier attack. He did not have the strength to fight it off. For 2 weeks, he lay in their bedroom fighting for breath while Olivia sat beside him, holding his hand and praying. On a sunny morning in April, he opened his eyes and looked at her with clear recognition. "Olivia, I am here. I am right here. You gave me a beautiful life. We gave each other a beautiful life. Will you be all right without me?" She wanted to lie, to assure him she would be fine. But honesty had always defined their relationship. "Eventually, but I will miss you every day for the rest of my life. Do not mourn too long. You deserve joy. You were my joy," he smiled, that familiar smile that still made her heart flutter even after all these years. "I love you. I love you too, always." He closed his eyes and slipped away as peacefully as a man could hope. Olivia sat holding his hand for a long time, feeling the weight of 37 years together settling around her. He had come into her life a lonely cowboy with torn clothes and a broken heart. He had left it a prosperous rancher surrounded by family, loved and loving to the end. The funeral was huge. People came from throughout Washington state to pay respects to Robert Dawson, a man who had helped build the ranching industry and who was known for his fairness and integrity. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking of a father who had taught him to work hard and love deeply. Jamie spoke of how his father had encouraged his education, even though it meant his son would not follow him into ranching. Rose talked about feeling safe and cherished, about a father who had made her believe she could do anything. But it was Olivia who had the last word. "My husband once asked me if I could mend his lonely heart," she said, her voice steady despite the tears running down her cheeks. "I told him then that hearts mend themselves, given time and care. What I did not know, what I learned over 37 years of marriage, is that when two hearts heal together, they become stronger than they ever were alone. Robert and I mended each other. We built a life that would have been impossible separately. And though he is gone, the life we created continues in our children and grandchildren, and in this ranch that will bear his name for generations. That is not a broken heart. That is a heart that beats strong and true until its very last moment, filled with love and joy and purpose. That is all any of us can hope for." Olivia lived another 15 years after Robert's death. She stayed at the ranch, helping Thomas manage the business side of operations and serving as the family matriarch. She continued sewing, creating beautiful garments until her eyes began to fail. She watched her grandchildren grow up and welcomed great-grandchildren into the world. She never remarried. When asked why, she would smile and say she had already had the great love of her life. Why would she settle for less? In the summer of 1930, at 75 years old, Olivia died peacefully in her sleep in the bedroom she had shared with Robert. Her children found her with a smile on her face, holding an old shirt she had been darning the night before. It was one of Robert's shirts from their early days, worn and patched many times over. She had kept it all these years, unable to part with it. At her funeral, Thomas spoke of a mother who had been the backbone of their family. Jamie talked about her quiet strength and fierce love. Rose remembered being taught to sew, patient hands guiding hers, her mother's voice soft with instruction and encouragement. But it was Thomas's oldest son, now a man of 27 and helping run the ranch, who told the full story. He spoke of a young seamstress who had offered to mend a cowboy's clothes and ended up mending his life. He told how they had built the ranch from nothing, through hard work and love and absolute devotion to each other. He reminded everyone that the prosperity they all enjoyed had started with a simple act of kindness and a bold question asked in a dress shop. "My grandmother showed us all what love can build," he concluded. "Not just in material success, though there is that, but in family, in community, in a legacy that will continue for generations. She and my grandfather proved that two broken hearts can heal each other and create something beautiful in the process. That is what I will remember. That is what I will teach my own children someday. That love, real love, is the foundation of everything that truly matters." They buried Olivia beside Robert under the oak trees near the creek, on the land they had claimed together 52 years earlier. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, 4 generations of the family they had created, and friends from throughout the state. The ranch continued to thrive, passed from generation to generation of Dawsons. Thomas's son expanded it, buying adjacent properties. His children carried it into the modern era, adapting to new technologies and markets, while maintaining the standards of quality their great-grandfather had established. And in the house on the hill, in a bedroom that had been added onto and modernized over the decades, Robert's original carved cedar cradle remained. Each new Dawson baby slept in it for their first months, a tangible connection to the couple who had started it all. The town that had been barely a crossroads grew into a small city. The state of Washington transformed into an economic powerhouse. But on the Dawson Ranch, the story of Robert and Olivia remained central to the family's identity. It was told at holidays and celebrations, passed down to each new generation. The story of a lonely cowboy who asked a seamstress if she could mend his heart, and the woman who said yes not by fixing him, but by building a life beside him where healing was inevitable. Their love story became legend in the family, an example of what two people could create together when they chose each other every day. When great-grandchildren complained about the hard work of ranching or the sacrifices required to build something lasting, they were told about Robert and Olivia's first winter in a dirt-floor cabin. When young people questioned whether real love existed, they were reminded that it did, that it had built the very foundation on which they all stood. The dress shop in Seattle where they first met was long gone, replaced by modern buildings and paved streets. But in family archives, carefully preserved, was the shirt Olivia had first mended for Robert, its patches now fragile with age. Beside it was the green silk dress Robert had bought her, faded but still beautiful. These artifacts told a story more powerful than words, a story of two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something that lasted beyond their lifetimes. Because in the end, Robert's heart had indeed been mended, not by Olivia alone, but by what they created together. A home, a family, a legacy. And Olivia's lonely heart, just as broken in its own way, had healed alongside his. Two solitary souls who took a chance on each other and proved that love, given the right circumstances and people willing to work for it, could transform everything. The creek still ran through the property, its water clear and cold. The meadows still bloomed with wildflowers each spring. The house still stood strong on its hill, sheltering the descendants of the couple who had built it. And on quiet evenings, when the wind was just right, it was almost possible to imagine Robert and Olivia on their porch swing, holding hands and watching the sunset over the land they had claimed together, their hearts whole and their love eternal.